Hello, and welcome to Story Time. I'm, for some reason, insanely nervous. I have not done this before, but we're going to set the mood with some spooky music. Tonight, we're going to be reading a story called Abandoned by Disney. Thank you for the good luck on the stream. I am very nervous, but we're going to be reading stories today. This is a little bit different from usual, but we'll figure this out. If I stutter at any moment, I'm sorry. But like I said, this story is called Abandoned by Disney. It is a creepypasta story. It is about 23 pages long, but that's only because I have big text, so I can read it. You guys ready? I hope you are, because I'm not. Let's get started. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real life ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ship would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. And they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate. There was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand. It obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. Now, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in the North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you'd know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened/pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was controversial undertaking from the start. Disney brought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, the gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security. After he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee, Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damned thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and their local revenues came into play, and their opinions turned in on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down, and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it close over a decade ago. I lived maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so really I only heard the ramblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there just felt as angry about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there was rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time in getting there, basically because honestly it took another year after I found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. It is a little bit of a weird story, but it'll get there. Just be patient. It's building up. Naturally, no official Disney site or resort or resource made any mention of the palace. That had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had an opportunity, or had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there laundering their embarrassment, you know? Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were merely inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research. And even then, it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say where would I find Mowgli's. The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area mixed with the native species of flora that belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut with giant sequoias? The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by the burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrapped with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney," clearly the handiwork of some past locals or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the palace were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the ground was the statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird shit covered whole wasps of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint had peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had once again painted "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges. Every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool, now had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably from hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, and carefully letting go, but within seconds it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the palace. Just like the Treasure Island resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain and commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut the water off long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. though it was like a whisper, probably my own breath echoing in the silence, or just rather another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. Short, unknown reply. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. Unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room. Or worse. Some vagrants had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front door of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would have given me at least one thing to show for all of my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on the pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo, then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the details of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and I should have known that they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. Using my camera flash as sort of an improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. The sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would have definitely had something interesting stuff back there in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. 1 sec, I'm gonna take a sip of tea. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photographs or want only steal. Oh, there's a typo. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascot-only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhauled was illuminated overhead. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room and an old, static-filled television and long rotted-out food and drinks on the counter. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascot's only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melded with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on the hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started walking away. There was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was just going to keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hanging on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothing on hangers towards the back. What I found odd and what I wanted to photograph right away was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white and white where he should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off the photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls. Upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen putrid cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bed-raggled characters' head on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back at the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know. I had to for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That was when Mickey, the photo's negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet, the Mickey Mouse costume, or whatever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled no over and over and over. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it up at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera's screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey Mouse costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen of whatever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died, went blank, quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements, similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free from a predator's jaw. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard snickering, tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. Did you get scared? Did you get scared? That was 23 pages of Abandoned by Disney. How'd you guys feel about that? This was a lovely creepypasta story. I don't have the name of it. I don't know where it went. But if you looked up Abandoned by Disney on creepypasta.com, you will find this story on there. And many others. Mickey, you better get ready because you're gonna scrap. I mean, just look at him. Do you not feel afraid? Would you be able to square up with this Mickey Mouse? You don't know what's inside of him. Or how many others that there are. Do you feel like you can take him by yourself? Or the multitude of other mascots that may be in that building? That made you actually sick? Oh no! Oh no, I'm so sorry. Are you No. Go sip some water. It's okay. Don't worry. He's gone. He can't hurt you. Now then. Or do you want to leave it here? Or do you want to read another story? It's only been about 30 minutes. Do we want another story? Or shall we discuss Abandoned by Disney? Because there's nothing worse than finding a padlocked door, a gate, if you will. You want more? We can go for more. Let's set this one aside. Let's find another story. I have a few short stories as well. Why don't we read some of those? We have a couple here. We'll do these ones, and then we'll probably call it. Story time will end after this one is done. Okay. Oh! Why you don't show? 1 second, it's not showing. Give me 1 moment. Let's see if I can fix this. Let me remove the filter from this one. There we go. Now then, let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. You ready? A man went into a hotel and walked up to the front desk to check in. The woman at the desk gave him his key and told him that on the way to his room, there was a door with no number that was locked and no one was allowed in there. Especially no one should look inside the room under any circumstances. So he followed the instructions of the woman at the front desk, going straight to his room and going to bed. The next night, his curiosity would not leave him alone about the room with no number on the door. He walked down the hall to the door and tried the handle. Sure enough, it was locked. He bent down and looked through the wide keyhole. Cold air passed through it, chilling his eye. What he saw was a hotel bedroom like his, and in the corner was a woman whose skin was completely white. She was leaning her head against the wall, facing away from the door. He stared in confusion for a while. He almost knocked on the door out of curiosity, but decided not to. This disinclination saved his life. He crept away from the door and walked back to his room. The next day, he returned to the door and looked through the wide keyhole. This time, all he saw was redness. He couldn't make anything out besides a distinct red color, unmoving. Perhaps the inhabitants of the room knew he was spying the night before and had blocked the keyhole with something red. At this point, he decided to consult the woman at the front desk for more information. She sighed and said, "Did you look through the keyhole?" The man told her that he had, and she said, "Well, I might as well tell you the story. A long time ago, a man murdered his wife in that room, and her ghost haunts it. These people were not ordinary. They were white all over, except for their eyes, which were red." And then the cold sweat begins to drip down your back. Under the covers. Tonight's like every other night. You lay there in the dark and silence alone, with no company other than your thoughts. You shift and roll throughout your bed. Just you and your thoughts. You ponder, you plan, and you fantasize. Anything to distract from the ringing silence that surrounds you. You hear a creak. A common sound to hear on such a still night. But you still recoil when the sound hits your ears. You hear the sound almost every night. Just the sheer unexpectedness sets off a trigger in your head as paranoia takes over. The thoughts that once illuminated your mind are now darkened. What was once pleasure and success has now turned to demons and killers. The silence that your mind was distracting you from has now become the focus. You lay there, silent, listening for any obscure sound, hoping that the silence doesn't leave. Every little noise adds to your paranoia, and the silence lingers as you await the next unexpected occurrence. You're too afraid to open your eyes, at the thought of seeing anything your mind can conjure. You lay there, alone, in fear. The fear builds in your mind as you try to find a quick escape from anything it creates. You revert to your childhood solution, hiding under the covers. You pull the blanket over your head and lay in silence. You hear noises, but they don't seem as scary. You figured if they can't see you, you're safe. The heat builds up under your blanket, but you put up with it simply for the comfort it supplies. You begin to calm down and relax, and revert back to your usual logical self. It's just you and your thoughts again, alone, under your blanket. You think of how silly it was to get so scared and worked up over a silly little noise. Eyes closed, you lift the blanket off of your face as the built-up heat is released. You breathe a sigh of relief and roll over only to hear a deep, grating voice whisper, "Oh, there you are," as the sound of footsteps creeps towards your bed. And this is why I have a small room with a lot of stuff around my bed. It will trip before it ever gets to me. That's when I run. Oh. And let's take a brief moment to take a sip of tea. This next one's called A Knock on the Window. I lay in my bed, restless and alone. On a dark and silent night, I toss and turn in my bed, trying to find a comfortable spot, but I feel uneasy. Something about tonight just didn't feel right. I toss and turn until I finally find a comfortable position. I close my eyes, but it doesn't make a difference. It's too dark in my room to see a thing anyways. I guess it takes time for my eyes to adjust to a darkness. I lay there, still and silent, on a still and silent night. My body is relaxed, my mind is blank. I'm ready for some much-needed rest. Instantly, the silence is shattered and my mind fills with fearful thoughts as my startled eyes flash open. Knock, knock. It's almost undoubtedly the sound of a fist on glass. But no, it couldn't be. What would someone's motivation be to wake someone alone in their home? Think logically. If someone wanted to break in, why would they warn me with a knock? They would just break in. Making a loud and obvious noise, or try to be as silent as possible. Why would they knock? Monsters don't exist. I could give myself some peace of mind and simply look out the window. but I'm facing the other way and I'm too timid to turn my head. Afraid of finding my greatest fears standing outside my window. What could it be, though? Maybe a couple birds flew into my window? No, that's too unrealistic. Could a group of kids be running around late at night, knocking on windows to get a few laughs? It's a possibility. Come to think of it, maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I heard the usual creak in the house and my paranoid mind has mistaken it for a knock. Knock, knock. Nope, that definitely wasn't my imagination. Those damn kids are persistent. They don't want to quit until they get that reaction. Maybe some sick, twisted freak is standing outside waiting for me to look so he can smash through and attack me. No, don't think that. Don't get paranoid. Besides, he's outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. Monsters don't exist. Besides, I haven't moved yet. Hopefully those kids will think I'm a heavy sleeper and leave me alone. Knock, knock. No, it can't be kids. No kids would wait around this long just to get a reaction from one lonely guy. They'd just get bored and move along. But what could it be? Why would a serial killer target me? Of all people. Oh, I've lost my place. Crap. I clicked and I lost my place. There. Think logically. Monsters don't exist. Don't get paranoid. They're outside. I'm inside until I hear a shatter. I know I'm safe, but if it's a monster or some sort of killer, what could it be? Just pretend to be asleep and maybe they'll go away. Knock, knock. Oh God, I can't think of a noise I hate more than that persistent knock. Please go away. Just leave me alone and let me be. There's no hope. It's going to get me in here and do sick and horrible things to me. Inhale. Take deep breaths. I can feel my heart pound out of my chest. Just relax. Monsters don't exist. Remember, they're outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. Repeat that. Don't let your paranoia get the best of you. Just pretend to sleep. Don't move a muscle. Knock, knock. They're outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. Monsters don't exist. Just pretend to be asleep and pray it'll go away. Knock, knock. They're outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. Frightful tears begin to drip down my face. Monsters don't exist. Monsters do not exist. I begin to whisper to myself. They're outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. They're outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. Knock, knock. I can't take it anymore. I'm gonna go mad listening to these knocks. At least if I see what it is, I'll have a peace of mind. Take a deep breath. I repeat to myself one more time. They're outside. I'm inside. Until I hear a shatter, I know I'm safe. I take a few more breaths. My heart pounding as hard as it ever has pounded at a mile a minute. I slowly turn my head to face the window. My heart sinks into my chest and I'm too afraid to scream or move. I turned my head to find a pale figure with beady, black eyes staring through me and into my soul as a horrid grin creeps across its face. It was standing outside the whole time, knocking on my window. How do you feel? But the silence was broken and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore? That is all of the stories that I have for today. Monsters only exist until you give them a cookie. I mean, what kind of cookie are you giving a monster? Would a monster even want a cookie from you? Maybe the reason why we leave cookies out during Christmas time on Christmas Eve is not for Santa, but for something else. How do you guys feel about story time? We have deep thoughts here. Why is it doing that? I don't know if you could actually hear that. It is making weird noises. I feel like I need to set this up better next time I do a story time. I need to work out some sound effects more, because I had a bunch that I wanted to use. I didn't have them set up in the right place. Don't give monsters a cookie. He's been to rehab 5 times. But that's what you need to take care of yourself. The cookie is a means of protection. If you don't have a cookie, then what do you have? There's nothing protecting you at that point. Next time we'll have to go a little bit longer and have a couple more stories that we're going to go through. How'd you guys feel about this? Was it good? Did you get scared? I enjoyed it. Storytime was nice. That's good. If you ever feel like you have a story that you would want me to read, send it my way. We'll read some more spooky stories sometime in the future. I have a few other books that we can go through. I think it will be fun. Who said the spooky time only has to last until October? Or through October? We can still do it during November. Maybe all the way up till Christmas. I don't know if I have that many stories, but we'll see how far it goes. If you feel like story time's a good time, let me know in the comments. If you have stories that you would want me to read, put it in the comments. Or send me a DM on Twitter. I have more stories of some ghost stories and some Celtic legends. I did not get scared though, mostly because I was working. You had a distraction. For those that are just sitting here only watching this, I am sorry for your heart rate. You're gonna need some cat videos after this. And I hope those kittens will make you happy. Just don't think about Mickey Mouse. The mascot. And the head of Donald Duck. Just don't think about it. I'll try to find some scary stories to share your way. Please do. I did find a lot of this on a whim. So there's a lot of stories that we can potentially read in the future. Mickey Mouse about to catch these hands. I mean, here. This is the sound of you punching Mickey Mouse. Or how about a kick? Or maybe, where is it? How about a karate kick? The noise that you make to not be afraid of the Mickey Mouse that is in front of you. You need to make some noises so you're not as afraid. Or maybe you have a bow and arrow with you. And you somehow have a lot of arrows at the time. The funny thing, I make those noises all the time. I'm glad this has been a good time. I want to do more of this. I was very nervous in the beginning, but now I'm feeling rather happy about it. I stumbled a little bit, but it worked out in the end. Next time, I'll set up my sound effects a little bit more to the story. Gonna crab walk down the stairs to escape my dominance. All you hear is, ha ha, in the distance. And you're wondering why that you see big black ears in the distance, a white face, and all you hear is another ha ha. And you wonder why you've entered this building in the first place. You have no idea why you're here. And why you've decided to do something so outrageously stupid. And to go into an abandoned anywhere. There's so many videos that are like that. Abandoned houses, abandoned hospitals. Do you think that's a really good idea for you to go there? Not just for paranormal reasons, but for real life reasons. The things that are scarier than the paranormal are things that are real and actually there in front of you. This is you as you're going down the steps as a crab asserting your dominance. Going snip snip at Mickey Mouse. Well, I can definitely say that this is all for story time for tonight. It's only been about an hour, but I think that's all purely people can handle when it comes to spooky things, other than like video games in general. Stories hold a different, more sinister feeling when it comes to horror stories, or horror anything. Sure, a horror movie is terrifying because of what you're seeing right in front of you. But when you're reading stories, it's a little bit different. You have more of an imagination to it. You create your own fears and project your own fears onto stories. You have more of an imagination with just text on a page. And with that, story time is done for today. We'll read some more stories next time. I don't know whether or not it'll be next week, but maybe the week after. I have an idea for next week, and I hope it's okay. We'll have to give some things a shot. I have ideas, and simultaneously, it's going to coincide with your ideas. Thank you for being with me for story time. If anybody is in here who has not watched this stream before, please subscribe and become a friend. A nice friend, like Mickey Mouse, who's always with you, always here. Come join us in the basket to make friends with everyone else. With that, I bid you adieu. I'll see you next time, tomorrow, for Luigi's Mansion. We'll read stories again some other time. And I hope you will join me then. Once again, if you have any stories that you would like me to read, any spooky stories at all, send them my way. Leave it in a comment or send me a Twitter DM. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for being with me. Make sure to eat. I know after this story you probably didn't want to, but make sure to feed yourself and make sure to hydrate. And I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye, guys. Goodbye.